I'm very pleased now to go right into the introduction for Senator Daniel Sullivan of Alaska to deliver keynote remarks on the current state of the economy, and he will take some questions after his remarks. So, Senator Sullivan became Alaska's 8th U.S. Senator. Prior to this, he served as Alaska's Attorney General and Commissioner of the Alaska Department of Natural Resources. He also served as U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Economics, Energy, and Business, and as a director in the International Economics Directorate at the White House. His public service also includes a distinguished career in the military. He has served as an infantry officer. He's currently a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. Senator, thank you for your service. Please join me in welcoming Senator Dan Sullivan.
Okay, well, thanks, Steve, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to kind of get into a topic that I'm been very focused on. As Steve mentioned, I've only been in, I say only, but I've been in the Senate for 3 years now, a little under 3 years. And I will tell you the biggest surprise that I saw when I came here, and I actually just came from the floor with a bunch of my colleagues. We were doing a colloquy on the Senate floor, and it's a topic that was the surprise topic and something I've been talking about since I got here, was the issue of economic growth, which I know all of you care about. And to me, what was the biggest surprise was how nobody, and I'm talking Democrats, Republicans, certainly the Obama administration previously, nobody talked about the issue of growth. Nobody. And that was kind of the shocker to me, because with the exception of national security, to me, that's probably the most important thing we can be doing down the road here in the Congress to make sure our economy's growing. And you guys all know the numbers, but a lot of people don't, is that we've had a lost decade of economic growth, right? We're now on almost 13 years where we have not hit 3% GDP growth for a year. Ever. 1 year. Haven't done it. And yet nobody talked about it. So I started going down. I just did it again. My staff calls it the Ross Perot speech because I have these charts and everything, but I just point to the numbers. Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Clinton, Reagan, you name it, you look at the numbers, the traditional levels of growth have been way above 3%, closer to 4%. Some of those presidencies, as you know, we were smoking, right? Clinton, Reagan, 7% GDP growth years, and yet we haven't hit it in almost 13 years now. 3%, just 3%, which is okay. It's not great, but it's not bad. You guys know this, and yet nobody talked about it. So, but I'm actually one of the most optimistic guys in Washington. I know optimism and Washington, D.C. are not terms you normally associate with each other. But the reason is because finally we are very focused on this issue. In the Congress, in the White House, and I also think when we focus on it, it plays to our strengths. One of the other things I've done a lot, in addition to this economic 3% GDP growth speech and rift, and hey, how come we're not talking about it? What do we need to do to get back to it, at least 3%, is this idea of what I call, I've termed this speech called We Hold All the Cards speech. Some of you may have recalled, as a little over a year ago, there was a cover of The Economist magazine. And it literally had all the leaders of the world sitting around a poker table playing cards, right? It was a cartoon. So I had President Obama, had Putin, he had his shirt off. And it's a really funny picture, but it's a serious thing, right? Hey, all the countries in the world, the big countries, Xi Jinping, around the poker table with their cards. And what I've been saying, when you look at what cards we have, yeah, we certainly have challenges, but I still think we hold almost all the cards, all the aces that so many other countries would want. So what are those cards? They are industries and CEOs and entrepreneurs like those represented in this room, a high-tech sector that's still, being challenged by other countries, but still, I think, top in the world, an entrepreneur culture with venture capital and private equity that can take good ideas and commercialize them better than anyone else in the world. An ag sector that still feeds much of the world. An energy sector. As Alaska Senator, I think it's something very important to my state, but also to the country. We have a renaissance in energy right now where we're the largest producer of oil, gas, renewables in the world, bigger than Saudi Arabia, bigger than Russia. You don't think the Russians or Chinese would love to have that card in their hand? We have the world's most professional and lethal military. We have allies across the globe. Right? I like to say we are an ally-rich nation. Our adversaries are potential adversaries. Think about it. North Korea, Iran, Russia, China, ally-poor. And yes, we have a government that can be dysfunctional at times, but we have a constitutional form of government where we actually have a transition of power that's orderly. I think China and Russia could learn a lot from us on that. So we have great universities. I know we just talked about education here. I have 2 daughters in college, 1 in high school, but when you go around and see our universities, again, world class, nobody can touch those in terms of what we have. So we have all these great cards, and I don't think we've been playing them well because we've been growing at about 1% GDP growth a year. So why am I optimistic? Because I think that the ingredients of what we can do to return to traditional levels of growth. I don't believe in this idea that's, to me, one of the most dangerous notions in town. Again, when I got here, I started asking a question, how come we're not growing? Well, it's the new normal. The new normal. America should not expect to grow at above 1.5% GDP growth because of secular stagnation. You've heard all the terms. I just don't buy it. Hopefully you guys don't buy it. I don't buy it. And so what we need to do is start getting a mix of policies that can help us get back to traditional, robust levels of economic growth that Democrats and Republicans have agreed on and pursued for decades. So what is that mix? I think you're starting to see that mix. First, tax reform. And we can do some Q&A here. I can give you an update on where we are on that. But I'm still hopeful that a lot of this can be bipartisan because if you look at what we have focused on in our tax reform bills are things that the Simpson-Bowl Commission talked about, that President Obama talked about, that yes, Chuck Schumer a couple years ago was talking about. He's not talking about it now, but he was talking about it a couple years ago, that we can, there's a lot of, I think, consensus on what we can do in terms of corporate, S-Corp, and importantly, individual tax reform, which we're very focused on now. Infrastructure and permitting reform. This is a big, big area of focus of mine. You know, I've been telling the president and everybody in the White House, we're working very closely on what will hopefully be a big infrastructure bill as soon as the tax reform bill gets done. Again, I think there should be widespread bipartisan support on this. But the one thing, when I mentioned permitting reform, we have to do better on that. Let me give you an example. I've been very, very, very focused on this issue of how long it takes to build things in America. A road, a bridge, a pipeline. We had a hearing, I serve on the Commerce Committee, we had a hearing on airport infrastructure. I think everybody agrees we need to do a little bit better airport infrastructure. Every time I fly into LaGuardia, which isn't often, I land in that airport and I'm like, whoa. You got to be kidding me. This is America's greatest city, and our airport, this looks like something from a developing country, okay? So we had a hearing. Seattle-Tacoma SeaTac Airport. They built a new runway. The head of SeaTac Airport was testifying. I didn't know the answers to these questions, but I'm obsessed by them. So I asked him, how long did it take you to build your new runway? He said, 4 years. I'm like, all right, it seems a little long, but I'm not in construction. I was complicated, went out into the harbor a bit. So then I asked him in the hearing, how long did it take you to get the pre-build federal permits before you could build the runway? 15 years. So the committee room did what you guys just did, which was like kind of a collective ugh. And then he looked at me and he goes, Senator Sullivan, I believe between the time it took to build the runway and get the permits to build the runway, the ancient Egyptians had already built the Great Pyramids. So this is one of the things that we're focused on. Again, I think there should be strong bipartisan support on that. As I mentioned already, energy. Another huge opportunity that this administration is focused on. We just had a bill that was marked up in the Energy and Natural Resources Committee about opening more critical areas of Alaska to responsible resource development. And by the way, the one thing I always remind my colleagues here, look, we do it. I was in charge of that in Alaska. We develop our resources more responsibly than any other place in the world. And when you try to shut down resource development in Alaska, like unfortunately the last administration did, you're not protecting the environment. You're just driving investment to places with the worst records, like Russia, Nigeria, Iran, Brazil. And so I think there's an enormous opportunity on energy, and there's a lot of focus on that right now. And then I would also say, I think that this administration is putting together some very strong appointments on these kind of issues at the lower level, undersecretary, assistant secretary. And they're also, for those who are interested, we have a lot of national security challenges, putting together, I think, a very strong national security team in these kind of challenging times. I'm a little biased because when you look at Secretary Mattis, Secretary of Defense, General Kelly, the Chief of Staff of the White House, Chairman Dunford, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they all happen to be Marines, but I'm good to go with that as well. We were just celebrating the Marine Corps birthday over lunch. That's my Marine Corps tie I'm wearing, so 242 years of the Marine Corps. But serious people, and we just today had more nominees. I sit on the Armed Services Committee, but very good people, I would say, very experienced people coming into government to help us address what is clearly some significant national security challenges. So I would just leave you with this. If we can get back to strong levels of economic growth, which is a goal, like I said, I was just giving a speech on the Senate floor, this should be something that all 100 senators agree with. Nobody should agree that, hey, 1.5%, yeah, that was okay. No, it wasn't. And don't believe the new normal. What we need to do is get our policies right so all these cards that we have, all these aces, to be honest, relative to every other country in the world, so we play them better. And I think we're starting to do that, and I think that's going to not just benefit the economy, but as you all know, when you see economic growth that's lagging year after year, that can weigh on families, that can weigh on the social fabric of the country. And when there's opportunity and a sense of optimism in the country, I think that has an impact much, much beyond just jobs in the economy, but the whole social fabric of the country. So that's why I'm optimistic. There's a lot of focus on that right now, and I think it should be bipartisan focus. And I know that you guys, in many ways, play the key role in it. So I want to thank you for what you do to grow our economy, to employ people. And what I'm trying to emphasize with all of you is that we're trying to make it so we have even more opportunity in the years to come. So thank you very much. Appreciate it, Steve. And look, I can take a few questions and look forward to it. Thanks again.
John Spector from the Committee for Economic, from the Conference Board and the Committee for Economic Development. Our economists would, let me just say, personally, I think that the opportunities that you described are spot on, and we don't often enough reflect on the relative advantages that we have over other countries. Our economists, though, would caution on one point, not that the opportunities aren't there or as big as you described, but from a demographic point of view, I think we need to be careful to not overpromise what the impact of those are.
Yeah.
Because countering that for the next 15 years, just the growth of the labor force is going to be at historically low levels, lower than in every one of the presidencies that you mentioned. So the net impact of all that is going to be a percentage or a percentage point and a half lower than it would have otherwise been. That doesn't diminish anything that you said. In fact, maybe it even makes it more important. But I just would like you to react.
Well, look, I would, one of the real great privileges from my perspective of being in the U.S. Senate is that if you reach out to people on issues that you care about, whether it's foreign policy or national security experts or economists or CEOs or business people, labor unions, and if you ask, hey, could you come by, whenever you're in town again, I'd love to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. Most people say yes, right? Which is a privilege. And one of the things that I've done in my first 3 years in the Senate is that I have literally, on this issue of growth, I have reached out to as many smart people, CEOs, central bank governors, you name it, to meet with me, and I usually have 3 questions. A, do you believe that 1.5%, 2% GDP growth is America hitting on all 4 cylinders? In other words, do you believe the idea of the new normal? This is it. Good luck. Even though we have been hitting traditionally since World War II, heck, even in the Depression, we had years of 3% GDP growth. Nobody says yes to that. Nobody. I have not had one person say, yep, this is it, Senator. Expect this for the next decade. So no one buys into the secular. Look, even the Obama administration, the first 2 or 3 years, their initial estimates were 3, 3.5, 4. This is their CBO. This is their Council of Economic Advisors. And as you guys know, when you look at the history of the country in terms of economic growth, a lot of times the deeper the recession, the sharper the recovery. So nobody, at least as far as I haven't been stacking the deck. I've reached out to everybody. And then I asked, well, what do you think, if you don't believe that, if you believe that we can get back to traditional levels of growth, maybe not the Clinton years or Reagan years, but at least above 3%, what should we do? Now, that is where the opinions of the experts differ, but almost everybody agrees on tax reform and the overregulation of the economy. And the ideas like I was talking about how, it takes on average almost 6 years to permit a bridge in America. I mean, come on, what are we doing? Nobody's for that. Well, there's a few groups that are for that, but that's a whole other story. So I do think, and then energy, right? Everybody's like, where do we get our next productivity burst? And again, everybody seems to, this is how you get productivity. I think the real smart people, as far as I can tell, don't fully know where you get it. You got it in the 2000s and 1990s with regard to the internet. But I think energy is just an incredible area that we're just scratching the surface on. I mean, the fact that we're the largest producer of natural gas right now, clean burning natural gas, it can help drive lower costs for businesses and homes and increase manufacturing and increase steel production and exports if we need it. I think we're just scratching the surface. And again, I don't want to be too partisan here, but the last administration was fully against that. They were against hydrocarbons, trust me. I fought them as Attorney General and DNR Commissioner in Alaska. So if we can start unleashing some of these things, it's not just me, much more important than me. I think most people I've talked to, and I've literally talked to hundreds over the last 3 years, think that a lot of the lack of growth is self-inflicted, mostly by our own federal government. So I'm hopeful that that's correct and that we're taking measures. But you're right, maybe there is something to this secular stagnation, and 2% is what we should be expecting for the next 10 or 20 years. I honestly think, though, if that's the future of America, we're going to have a rough patch in terms of a whole bunch of things. If we're back at 3 or 3.5, a lot of our challenges, in my view, start to take care of themselves.
Thank you for your remarks, Senator. I'm Barry Stern. I'm a former federal and state official in the area of education and workforce development. Your story about the runway at SeaTac taking 15 years for planning, another 4 years to build, reminds me of what happened in Los Angeles in 1994 during the Northridge earthquake. Governor Wilson found a way to get the most heavily trafficked freeway in the world, the Interstate 10 between Los Angeles and Santa Monica, fixed in 2 months where normally it would take 30. So we can do it.
Yeah,
just a matter of figuring it out. And that leads me to my question. Many of us have worked in the field of economic development and education development at the local or regional level. And what we're finding is that when communities plan together and they have the same strategic plan to increase the economic wealth of a community or a region, that works pretty well. Can you comment on the relationship between the federal government trying to create wealth and local areas that are trying to figure out, rather than each one having their own strategic plan, every community college, university, high school, they all have a strategic plan, but they're not linked to each other. We did it in Michigan. It cost us $5 million, but at least we got these strategic plans to align with one another. And we even got legislation from the governor, Governor Engler, to make sure that you wouldn't get your money from the federal government unless you had your operational plans align with your strategic plan.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's a great point. And, you know, you talked about I-10 out in California. You know, that also worked when there was a bridge that collapsed, you might remember, outside of Minneapolis. And again, there was this, you know, focus on getting it done. I had an amendment, went to the floor. It was an interesting debate because we were voting on something, so all 100 senators were on the floor, and it was just an amendment that said, if you're repairing or rebuilding one of the 42,000 structurally deficient bridges in America, and you're not expanding it, you're just taking the same size, same bridge, and you're either doing maintenance on it, repairing it, or fully rebuilding it, because there's 42,000 structurally deficient bridges. That's not good for the country. Then you get that as long as the state EPA is good to go, so this is kind of goes to your question a little bit, then you can waive all the federal permitting requirements. Right? That was an amendment. Pretty simple. I didn't get 60 votes, believe it or not. I got all my colleagues, and then about 4 Democrats voted for it, but we couldn't even get that over the goal line. We couldn't get 60 senators to agree with that. But I think that's changing because people are just scratching their heads. Like, of course, that's common sense to me. That's common sense. Hopefully it is to all of you. But to your broader point, it kind of goes with that bridge amendment. I'm a really big believer in this place does not have all the answers. If there's any state that recognizes one size does not fit all, it's my state. Which is a little bit, you know, we all come to the Senate and we say each state is really unique, which is true. Alaska just happens to be a little bit more unique than most states. And one size fits all doesn't work in Alaska. Most people in this town have never even been to my state. They have no idea how huge it is. They have no idea that 80% of the communities in Alaska are not connected by roads. We don't have roads in Alaska. I wish we had more roads, but we don't because of some of this permitting challenges. So I think when you give, particularly from Washington, much more incentives and encouragement to have the states and local communities work on their problems, because those governments are closest to the people. They're closest to the issues. They know a lot more about how to jumpstart the Alaska economy or the economy in Michigan than we do down the road. So to me, that whole idea of kind of a 10th Amendment federalism approach to government is really needed. It's needed for the economy, certainly. And as you guys all know, so much of the power and the authority to do anything in this country has gravitated towards Washington. I think it's good for the states, it's good for the country, it's good for the economy. As you're saying, to put your plans together that fit the individual states and have Washington encourage that, not be an obstacle to it. And I think, again, when you look at some of the people that are getting confirmed in these positions in the federal government, that's a lot of their philosophy, and I'm hopeful that that helps bring more ability of states and localities to plan in the way that you're talking, but that really helps us grow our economy nationally.
So, your staff says you got to go.
Okay, I got to listen to my staff, but thanks very much. Keep up the good work, and stay optimistic on what's going to happen here. Thank you.